This is TWiT.
Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella today announced plans to cut 18,000 jobs, the biggest layoff in the company's history. Microsoft also announced the end of the Nokia X, Asha, and Series 40 lines and the end of Microsoft's short experiment in the Android handset business. With us is Mary Jo Foley, who's a columnist for ZDNet and a host on TWiT's Windows Weekly show. Welcome, Mary Jo.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, and Roger Chang is the executive editor for CNET News. Welcome to you, Roger.
Thanks for having me.
All right, now, Mary Jo, much of this, obviously, is to get rid of some overlap with the Nokia acquisition. That's to be expected, but where else are cuts being made in the company?
So Microsoft's not really giving a lot of public details about where the other cuts are coming from, but they've told us a couple things. They've told us that about 1,300 or so of the jobs being cut are in the Seattle area. And I've heard from people who I know who are close to Microsoft that they're basically almost every part of the company is being cut, at least to some degree. So even legal's getting cuts. I mean, it's like nobody's immune from these cuts. It's not just about phone. It's not just about Xbox. It's really something going across the whole span.
And Mary Jo, how does this reflect kind of a larger strategy under Satya Nadella, the new CEO?
So he's been very clear about, he's been very clear about wanting to pivot Microsoft and remake them as a mobile first, cloud first, and also a productivity and platforms company. And he also has been very clear about saying, I want to be in consumer and enterprise both. I don't want to just kind of cut the company up, because Microsoft's a really big believer in the whole BYOD trend, and they feel like they have to be in all of these spaces simultaneously. That said, they really want to kind of pick and choose the spots where they feel like they can add value and have a chance to win. So that's why you see them really doubling down on things like Office, even if it means Office on platforms that are not Windows, Office on Android, Office on iPad. And with this series of cuts now, you're seeing them start to really tweak their inner organization. So they're trying to make some changes as to the way Windows and Windows Phone is structured so that they can be quicker to bringing the operating system releases to market. So they're kind of flattening out internally how they're structured there and taking away some of the kind of the siloed structure that had been put in place over the past few years that divided up dev, test, and PM. They have been very regimented, and that kind of resulted in them taking longer to bring new products to market.
There's already a lot of commentary flying around that this cut represents the cleaning up of Steve Ballmers' mess. That's one way to characterize it. Another way to characterize it is that it's a new Microsoft under a new leader, and it's a different kind of attitude about how a company should be organized or how lean a company should be. Where do you land on that spectrum of, you know, sort of blaming Ballmer or just it's a new day, that sort of thing? And also, how does this affect the management structure that Ballmer put in place recently before he was before he retired?
So I think it's a little oversimplified to say he's cleaning up Ballmer's mess, because if you look at some of the things he's being credited, he here, meaning Satya Nadella, he's being credited with some of the things that Ballmer himself already put in place. Office on iPad's a good example of that. That project got started under Ballmer, and Ballmer was even the one who said, you know what, let's bring this to market before the Windows version. It makes sense these days. So I think it's a little too simplistic to just say he's cleaning that up. But I do think he's trying to put his stamp, he again here being Nadella, on the new Microsoft and flesh out what they mean when they say one Microsoft. He is a guy who is very into the whole idea of experimentation, testing, using things like machine learning to make better decisions. So he's bringing all of kind of his core values to bear on Microsoft. And that's why you're seeing some of these changes happen. You're seeing him want to change the organization in ways that he thinks will make it more nimble and better suited to working in a world where Microsoft's not the dominant player it used to be. I mean, even I was just at the partner conference this past week where they talked to their resellers, and they put up a slide saying, hey, you know what? We used to be 90% of the market with Windows, and now we're 14% if you look at all devices. We have 14% share. We really need to change how we're going about approaching things.
14% is a big number for Microsoft. It's also the percentage of the workforce that's being cut, coincidentally. Yeah. Well, now, Roger Chang, what does the termination of the Nokia X, Asha, and Series 40 lines mean for the markets that those phones serve? Is this going to be something of a shock, or is this not going to make that big of an impact?
I think the Nokia X elimination is not a huge surprise. It's, it was kind of a half-baked project when it came out. There were a lot of questions about why Nokia was coming out with an Android powered phone just months before being, taken in by Microsoft. So they weren't impressive products, and to take those resources and bring them back and focus on Windows Phone, I think is a smart move. But the Asha line is a bigger question because it actually was fairly successful, and it sort of meets a need that Lumia can't yet fill. At this point, by withdrawing from Asha and those cheap, super cheap $15, $20 phones, it could open the door for Android to come in and kind of scoop up some of that lower end market share. So it's it's a bit mixed. I think the Nokia X thing was smart, but leaving Asha means, I think, leaving some market share on the table.
Roger Chang, some analysts are already saying that this is evidence that Microsoft really isn't interested in being a handset maker. What do you think?
I think that's the case. If you look through Elop's memo and Satya's memo, I mean, they want to focus on premium devices, marquee devices that are basically the standard bearer for Nokia Lumia Windows phones or Microsoft Lumia Windows phones. And so by moving to that one platform, by consolidating all your resources behind that one Windows Phone platform, that's how they're doing it, right? They're going to be focusing on fewer but stronger products, but under a consistent platform.
Mary Jo Foley, how do you think this layoff, this news, is going to affect the public perception of Microsoft? I mean, Wall Street seems to like it, but is this going to be perceived as that Microsoft is in decline or struggling or anything like that? Or would the public generally see this as more or less the kind of restructuring you'd expect after a big acquisition and a new CEO?
I think the public usually has very little idea about why companies do what they do. So I think they'll probably take this more kind of easy, simplistic approach and say this is Microsoft being in chaos and disarray. I mean, when you talk about cutting 14% of your workforce, it's like, wow, how did you get that bloated? That's the first thing people are going to ask. I think Wall Street already is showing that they're pretty bullish about it, and they've been really after Microsoft to make these kinds of cuts for a while. They've just been saying, you know what, you guys, you're top heavy, you've got too much management, your product line's all over the map. You really need to kind of focus on what your core is and really kind of pare down what you're doing. And I think we're going to see their stock price move because of that.
And
Roger Chang, is there any? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's all yours.
Roger, I was just curious, is there any significance to this particular timing? I know layoffs typically come on Fridays, and then in this particular distance from the leadership change and the acquisition, should we read anything into the timing here?
I mean, there's been a lot of things that have gone on, right? Satya's already sent out his memo, started talking about the change that he wants to bring to Microsoft, and then next week he's got Microsoft's earnings. So it kind of falls in between that those two events. He's going to hold a Q&A with employees tomorrow, but I think the first time he'll be able to address some of these layoffs publicly will be during the earnings conference call next week.
All right. Well, Mary Jo Foley is at blogs.zdnet.com/Microsoft, and you can follow her on Twitter at Mary Jo Foley. You can also find Mary Jo on Windows Weekly, Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Pacific with Leo Laporte and Paul Thurrott. Thank you so much, Mary Jo. Finally, we got you on Tech News today.
Now,
I'm so thrilled
long
you were
overdue.
Yes.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. And Roger Chang, of course, is at cnet.com and on Twitter at Roger W. Chang. Thank you so much for joining us, Roger.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Always a pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much.